All right, good morning. My name is Stacey Joy and I'm in Los Angeles, California. Today is December 5th, 2020. I'm interviewing Laura Langley from Little Rock, Arkansas for the oral history project titled COVID-19 Teacher Poets Writing to Bridge the Distance, which will be archived by Oklahoma State University Oral History Research Program. Hello, Laura.
Hello.
Would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Laura Langley. I'm here in Little Rock, Arkansas. Um, you may or may not hear one of my dogs come in. So
Okay.
that's Lulu.
Aw. So tell me about how you became an educator.
Let's see. So about 6 years ago, my first career, I guess, real career outside of or after college was baking.
Hmm.
And I think I was in my fifth year of that. And I had moved to Little Rock in the middle of my career of baking. And um, I got sick one week and, didn't have health insurance through work, didn't have paid time off or sick leave or anything like that, and was making $8 an hour. So it was kind of stressful. And then I was watching When the Levees Broke, which I'd always wanted to watch, the Spike Lee documentary on Hurricane Katrina, because I hadn't ever had a solid 6 or 8 hours to sit and watch it. And I remember calling my mom afterward, who's a teacher, and I was like, I can't keep baking. I want to do something for my community. And I thought, I could be a nurse or I could be a teacher. Those were kind of my two things. My mom was like, well, you never liked science that much, so maybe nursing's not a good
Right.
direction. And I was in the English department. I didn't major in English, but that was where I lived in college. So um, I decided to become an English teacher. And that day I reached out to the woman who became my advisor and graduate assistant. I guess I worked for her as a graduate assistant. Reached out to her that day, got the ball rolling, and was in the classroom a year later. And yeah, it was my mom's, like I said, a teacher. She has been since I was in kindergarten. And it was, I think, never an option in my mind because that's what she did. And then once I became a teacher, it felt like this is what I have always
Right.
wanted to do, or it feels very much like what I should be doing with my life. So I feel fortunate that I found it eventually, even if it took a little longer than.
So what's your role in education now? Talk a little bit about your school context.
Yeah, I teach English language arts for 11th and 12th graders at a arts and science magnet school, which I really appreciate. I went to magnet schools as a middle and high school student myself. And the students, while no one is there for English, there is some sort of motivation for them to be in school, whether it's because they're, choir or dance or band. They all have a pretty deep tie to something they're passionate about. And I think that's really special. And it also, for the English classroom, brings a lot of different talents and perspectives. And it's the third school I've taught at, and
Hmm.
it certainly feels like the most comfortable fit right now. And yeah, that's where I am.
So, we're here to document the impact COVID-19 has had on educators and education. So, going back to the spring of 2020, how did you learn that teachers in your state would be teaching remotely or that the school buildings would be closing?
So on March 12th, which was a Thursday, and I think it was the day before the last day of our quarter, the 9 weeks, I was in the middle of my prep, third period. So it was like 1 o'clock, and an announcement came over the PA that teachers and students should be aware that whenever we let out that day at 3:50, that we would not be coming back, at least until after spring break, which meant that we had the Friday and the following week that we were supposed to be in school. We'd be working from home, doing the AMI or alternative methods of instruction
Mm.
work. So we have that built in as like snow days or flood days.
Mm-hmm.
Students have assignments that they can work on. So the principal's like, prepare for yourselves for that. And I went to my fourth block right after, and we were finishing reading Great Gatsby that day. And we were supposed to start this project too. That was our cumulative, like the thing we've been working 2 months toward. And I was like, I don't know what's going on, but like, we got to finish this book. And the kids, it was my hardest class to engage. And they were all just kind of like, I think, deer in the headlights, like, okay, let's go, let's do this. And none of us realized that would be the last time we'd see each other. Some of them, I have the privilege of teaching again this year, but a lot of them haven't seen or heard from since that day. And then, we had spring break, and that, I guess we were supposed to hear back whether we would be returning after spring break, which, in hindsight seems obviously we wouldn't. And I think they, at that point, planned for us to go back at the end of April. And then at some point they just called it for the semester.
Wow. So around the same time that the buildings were closing, it was also National Poetry Month. And we began a process of writing along with other educators. We participated in Poems a Day. Can you talk a little bit about writing poetry during a pandemic? And if you have a poem you'd like to share that goes along with that?
Yeah, I actually mentioned my mother teaches English as well. And she had mentioned to me at some point, probably in those weeks of March leading up to April, that she was planning to participate. And I thought, first, like, I'm not much of a writer. I don't really want to share my writing on the internet. But then the first day of it, I pulled the prompt up, wrote, and after writing and then looking at other people's responses, I was like, okay, I'll try it. I'll try for a day. And like thinking originally that I would just write every day, but not post. And so I posted, and like just almost immediately that sense of community that the Poetry Month fosters was so palpable. I mean, by the end of the month, I was telling my husband, I'm like, oh, so-and-so commented on my poem. I felt like I had these connections to people. Oh, I'm getting emotional just typing that. At a time when even people close in proximity in the city, we couldn't see each other. And so to have these consistent voices of encouragement and of love and also the shared experience of being educators right now. I think it was huge. It felt the writing itself was very much just a meditation for me every day to kind of check in with myself, let myself vent if I needed to, which there were a lot of those days, but also be grateful for what I have and kind of take stock of where I was in that day, in that moment. At that point, I was also writing, just journaling regularly, because I think I thought one day, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, I'm going to want to know what that was like, or try to get back to what that shift felt like. And so, that was, it was just such a nice, consistent place. I mean, I could have done it, I think, through May, June, July,
Right.
if it persisted. The poem I selected is A Street Side Elegy in C, which I wrote for, remember it was day 5. I think it was music as inspiration. And I will say I'm not a musical person. I don't know anything about music other than enjoying it. But that was one of the things I really loved about this too, was that every day kind of was an opportunity for me to learn something, whether it was about a new form or something going on, the ones that required a little bit of research. That was kind of a nice break from whatever else was going on that day with school. Um, yeah, I don't think this one will make me cry.
Okay. It's okay either way.
All right. Our quintet gathers on respective curbs, more than 6 feet apart. This distance is not mandated. This distance is neighborly love. This distance is paradoxically, infuriatingly against the status quo. This distance is avant-garde. Neighbors converse, 2 octaves cleaved together, cleaved apart. We are whole C notes. They are whole C notes. No notes between. We create dissonance. We create consonance. Once in a while, a car, a cyclist, a walker will interject an E or a G. A momentary chord is struck, an interrupted cadence, head nods, smiles, hellos.
Wow.
So one of, I think, my favorite parts, which I almost hate saying that because I know at that time there was just so much heartbreak and things I can't imagine going on in the world. And then it felt like just like outside my window of my home, we had these like regular kind of meetings of neighbors because we were all stuck at home. And so we would, eventually, like, I think people would just kind of see through their windows other people outside and, go out to check on something, but really you're just wanting to have a conversation with a real human for a few minutes. And so, it was just most of the day during the week anyway, you'd see people just kind of on their curbs talking to one another. And it just felt like such a nice time to get to know them. We actually moved into this house a year ago when the pandemic hit, or the shutdown started anyway. And we hadn't really, my husband worked out of town all the time before this. And, as a teacher, I would use my breaks to go out of town as much as I could. So it was really the first time we were here together, and we got to know our neighbors better. Part of some of this is a little bit of venting about our state didn't and still hasn't acted very or acted at all in regards to the pandemic. And so it was refreshing and relieving, I guess, to be surrounded by neighbors who, despite not having a mask mandate and despite not having certain restrictions in place, we would hear everyone's similar feelings about our governor and what was happening at that time, and knowing that we're not alone in fearing this and being careful. And so it was just kind of a nice daily routine that grew out of the early days of the shutdown.
Wow. So COVID-19 impacted states and schools in different ways. How did your state or school respond? How did the policies impact your work as an educator? Talk a little bit about that.
So like I said, our state was pretty slow. Fortunately, our mayor here in Little Rock acted relatively quickly to put in a mask mandate and a curfew, and, shut parks down, that type of thing. Our state, though, didn't have a mask mandate in place until July. And by then, and even now, there's no real enforcement of it. I'm not sure if there is anywhere, but from the beginning, our governor was pretty adamant that we were, going to stay the course and needed to focus on the economy and keeping that afloat. In Arkansas, to some extent, we are very spread out. We have a relatively small population, so I think that was possible, but I think it also didn't send a great message to a lot of the folks here. Excuse me. So let's see, our school district is actually under state control right now. It was supposed to come out of it right before the shutdown, and that seemed an opportunity to keep us under it longer. And so as a district, we actually adopted a digital, or just like a learning program that students previously had used for credit recovery. So I pretty quickly switched from being a creator of curriculum or any kind of content to just stay monitor for students online and how they were working. I did think that the state did a good job of determining, like, as far as how students would graduate, it seemed like a pretty equitable approach. Whatever the student had first, or that third quarter of our semester, they couldn't receive a lower grade for the fourth quarter. So for the students who dropped off, they could still pass the semester, which I was happy to see that in place. And we had plenty of time to help the students who had failed to get back up. So I felt like that worked well. I know that they tried to get internet to students and families across the state. I don't know how well that worked. We had daily briefings from our governor through the beginning of August. And so he would talk about it. He didn't really talk about how that was actually working, but I'm trying to remember the rest of the question. Or if
no, it's fine. So I'm just thinking about, like, maybe some of those issues that you saw, did that impact your poetry writing in the spring?
Yeah, I think, and when I was reading through them the other day, almost every poem is, if not explicitly about my concerns or frustrations, it certainly is there in the emotion. I think the hardest part was just, there were students, and so I had all juniors and seniors last year and juniors and seniors this year. So I have a handful of students that I taught last year again this year, which has been so nice because I actually have relationships with them that were built in person. But there are some who I have on my roster who I didn't hear from, or I eventually was able to track down a phone number and get in touch with them. And I think that was really the hardest part. I mean, I think for some students, those few months were fine and they kind of enjoyed a disruption of their monotonous high school career. And I know from talking to several of them, or really corresponding on email or messages, that some of them like picked up hobbies they hadn't touched in years or got to spend more time with their families. A lot of them are essential workers, so they kept working and had kind of normal lives. But the few that I couldn't get a hold of, or I could, but were so exhausted from work that they couldn't do these assignments that, I wasn't even assigning to them. And I didn't really see a whole lot of value in them myself. So that was a hard, just kind of line to toe to try to get them to see that this is a box that they should check for their education. But at the same time, we're in the middle of a pandemic and we don't even, at that point too, it was like there was so much unknown. I feel like at this point, we, at least with promises of a vaccine, it feels a little bit like the light at the end of the tunnel is nearing. But there was so much up in the air. So that was hard to see, and really to not see how they were doing. And then there were parents too that I spoke with who were overwhelmed, working 3 jobs in the medical field where they haven't seen their kids. So we're trying to coordinate, like, how do we get your son to do his work who's staying with grandma? You get to see him through the screen door once a week. It was just like, and teachers have never been qualified to do all of the jobs we're expected to do, but that was the first time it just felt like it was all happening at once. And so, but again, I think the writing and really reading other people's writing helped me to kind of keep that perspective that these aren't normal times and I'm not alone, even though, sitting in my dining room converted into an office feels very unknown and isolating. But it felt nice to have that community there.
Would you like to share the poem that you wrote at that time?
Yeah, and actually, I didn't write this at the time, but this This is inspired by Claudia Rankine's poem, Weather. And so this was in August, one of the 5-day prompts. And I used this with my students and they loved it. And we had such a good time with it. They wrote their own and then created Flipgrid videos where they read them, which was so nice because it was, I think, the second week of school, and I got a chance to see and hear a lot of the students that I have still not seen at all, because the virtual students, most of them don't have their cameras on, so I don't know faces to names. But it was really nice to have this, to kind of give them an opportunity to talk about what their weather is, so whether that, like, what's weighing on them. I also gave them the option to write about what their umbrella is, so what it is that kind of saves them and gives them, keeps them afloat. So yeah, this was kind of like encapsulating, I think, for me, a lot of what the pandemic had been, and trying to get back, like, what it is to be teaching right now, or in August. Okay, so like I said, this is inspired by Claudia Rankine's poem, Weather. On a scrap of paper in the archives is written, I have forgotten my umbrella. Turns out, in a pandemic, everyone, not just the philosopher, is without. These days, I slather antibacterial gel on my angry, red, cracked hands every time I get in my car. I never even used to own antibacterial gel. These days, I pull clumsily fitting homemade masks across my face to protect me, them, their families, my family. Every slight ache, scratch at the back of my throat, heated moment, has me Googling yet again the symptoms. When Rachel had it, all alone in Mexico City, just her and an ornery orange cat, she only lost her sense of taste. 8 days, but what next? Is there a sequel to this horror? So I buy clothes that can withstand virus-killing high heat, buy shoes that never see the inside of my home, join book clubs to discuss our nation's original sins, buy more books than I have time to read, to learn, listen. I pull the umbrella from under the back seat of my car so that I can meet my students at this moment, a moment when the murder of yet another Black man in the name of law is a weekly occurrence. A moment when leaders are living above the same laws that keep so many in bondage. And also in this moment, I'm reminded that young folks see and breathe truth. Young folks do not tolerate what this country has passively accepted for 400 years. We will get by, we will survive.
Wow. Wow.
And yeah, I haven't even mentioned or included that the week that we wrote that was, as soon as that poem came up in Ethical ELA, I was like, I want to write to this with my students. And I mean, I think I assigned it, we read it Monday and Tuesday, and I wanted them, give them a couple weeks to write and record. And maybe the second day that we were reading it was the day that, and probably a good thing I can't remember his name, but the young white man in Kenosha shot and killed protesters. And it was just like, now things have seemed to have settled as far as the, again, like the militias and the Black Lives Matter protests that were being infiltrated by police and All Lives Matter folks. And that was so present all summer and the first few weeks of school as well. Our district serves mostly Black and Brown students. And so it felt, that was, the pandemic, of course, was always very present, but that to me was maybe more of something we needed to talk about and at least give space for. And of all the things our district has not done that I wish they had done, that was one more thing that, they required us to have about an hour of social emotional training that I guess was, I think in some document referenced the summer's civil unrest as being part of the reason for that training. And I mean, it just felt so, I don't know, it was like it makes sense to me that happened simultaneously, right? That people have the time and we were kind of in a pressure cooker at that moment. But it also just felt sadly very relevant to look at that poem that week. And my students, like I said in the poem, make me feel, I mean, and I've worked at very different schools, and at every one, they still give me such hope that that this generation of students, these young adults, see the world so much for what it is, as opposed to what my generation and generations before have been taught. And so despite all of the awfulness, they managed to continue to give me hope and joy. So it was a really nice way to start the school year amidst everything that was going on.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy. So how did your school year end? If we think about how typically we end our school year with the end of school activities and all of the fun things that come with ending a school year, how did yours end?
Pretty anticlimactically. I want to say the first or second week of April, the state came out with the mandate that students didn't have to, or their fourth quarter grade couldn't be any lower than their first quarter. So I had students, I think it was a Saturday when the announcement came out, and I had kids texting me within 30 minutes of that announcement, which I know they're not usually news watchers for the most part, but they're like, does this mean I don't have to do anything? And I was like, technically, and I would try to respond in a way that wasn't just yes, you can just start summer, because for the ones who had a good grade, or even a grade they were just satisfied with, I still of course am worried that 2 months of them being idle or stuck in a video game or whatever, it can't be good. So a lot of students by the time we got to the end of May had already kind of disappeared. I did have Zoom meetings regularly just to talk to them, not to I wasn't teaching anything at the time, and to me if they wanted to. I don't know if they wanted to, but they would usually stay on for an hour and we would just talk about what they were watching, what they were doing, how it was for them. And that was really the best part of probably May. We had a virtual graduation, which ended up being I kind of went in feeling just sad about it. And then did find myself getting pretty excited about watching. It was on Facebook, so you had all the family members and friends shouting out to their students, and President Clinton spoke directly to our class, which, and I think all of our high school classes, which wouldn't have happened under different circumstances. So it felt appropriately celebratory. There were some photos of students at home with their gown and cap with their families celebrating, which was really special. But after that, and that was probably the middle of May, the actual final days of school were not nearly as exciting as they normally are. And it was mostly me trying to track down the one or two kids who I'm like, you just have to do one more thing and then you can pass for this semester, and talking to parents. And it also just kind of blurred because I'd never really stopped working. I went from the school year ending to our district held focus groups for teachers, parents, and community members to kind of gauge what our thoughts were for the next school year, which I don't want to sound too cynical, but I think was more of a something they could put on the eventual plan and say that they did it. Because I know my group spoke with our district's attorney, who was shocked to hear our stories of the remote learning and how little engagement we had. And at that time, only, I want to say, France and Israel had gone back into the classroom, and it wasn't good. And I remember spending hours like researching this so that I'd be prepared for this focus group. And, it felt like hours of futility, which I probably knew going into, but it felt good to be a part of it. I kind of tried to insert myself wherever I could this summer in the district, just to try to learn what was going on, but also feel like I was doing something at a time when it didn't really feel like we could do much at all. So
what would you say is one of your most significant takeaways from that time?
So I feel like every summer I kind of have a chance to reset, and I, go back to all my idealistic, this is why I want to be a teacher, this is what I'm going to do this year. And, you get back in August and the district has all of these new shiny things they want you to use, or new approaches, or new PLC goals, or whatever it is. And suddenly all that idealism is kind of compromised by reality. And so this year, honestly, was kind of special in that from March till the middle of August, I was kind of on my own teaching wise. Like my department chair did not reach out until August. And so I did not hear a word from him for, I don't know, however many months that is. And I didn't interact with any of the teachers I work with in the building. I did work with a few to develop the essential standards for the district. And that was really great to meet teachers from other schools and kind of who are like-minded. I guess there's a certain kind of person who volunteers to do that. And so we were all very much on the same page, which was so nice, because I don't really have that at my building right now. And so I just feel like I was kind of steeped in this, like, I want to teach texts that are relevant, engaging, if not always, like this year especially. Like if we're going to be remote to some extent, like I need, like there's no dressing up Great Gatsby to a kid who's at home. Like they're just not going to pick that up. So that was kind of the first thing. I was like, we're only going to read books that I know they're going to enjoy. We're only going to read poetry I know that they're going to enjoy. Whatever we write will be, there needs to be a purpose beyond, I need a grade in my grade book. Like it needs to be, it's for their social emotional benefit. It's for, college essay, maybe, and I always try to, especially, now more than ever, it's like our communication is going to be digital so much going forward that you need to be able to write an email to somebody that sounds coherent. So really trying to focus on what they really actually need and not just what, English teacher wants them or district administrator wants them to know. And so I feel much more, I guess, confident about sticking to that now. And I think it just, in those months where everything was so stripped down in terms of, whether it's access to the work or just like our mental capacity being stripped down, it really became like we need, like the only thing I'm going to ask them to do needs to be actually beneficial to them and not have any other agenda. And so that's how I think I want to operate pre-pandemic times. But this was kind of the first time that I'm like really putting my foot, like when the other 11th grade English teacher, she's sticking to her 8-year-old now curriculum of teaching all the early American documents. And I'm like, when I was in the classroom trying to make that exciting, no one enjoyed sinners in the hands of an angry God. Like, this does not speak to them. And so I know she's still trying to make that work, and good on her if that makes her happy. But I have kind of dedicated myself to not doing that. And I am at this point entering, since I started mid-year, I'm kind of getting close to my 5th year of teaching. And I've almost always worked with teachers who've had many more years on me. So I've always felt a little bit like, well, I should probably like not rock the boat and go with them, at least on the surface. But now I'm just kind of like, I'm doing this how I want to do it. And that feels really good.
That's beautiful. Did you write a poem that was reflective of that end of the springtime era?
Yeah, I think, this one actually came right at the end of April, and I think kind of ties up a lot of these pieces. I'm trying to remember what this, okay, I guess it was just like a list of things that happened before I write, but it turned into something else.
Okay.
But, so this was, I draw my ink from. Another frustrating encounter with a student, a disappointing conversation with a coworker, an argument after dinner, my intuition squaring up with my intellect, the trembling yet unwavering need for gloves off bitching, the pending therapy session. Beautiful words wherever and whenever they find me. Fleeting observations, surely supercharged with meaning. Teaching by example. Well, that was more appropriate than I was remembering. And I guess those are things that, it was like a list of the things that get me to write.
Right.
The frustrations, but also the inspirations. And I think, and again, I mean, that month was so helpful in remembering how powerful just the practice of writing can be. And if I can, how to get my students into that place too, and not just writing. And I know, I mean, as I'm saying this now, I'm thinking like, oh, that little writing assignment I gave them yesterday was more about wanting them to just write something that day, not necessarily get into a writing headspace. But I guess that's also not so bad. You know, I'm kind of surprised sometimes by those little writing pieces.
So let's turn and go to the what's next. So if you think about what's teaching like for you now, describing your writing life, make some connections to other teachers through writing. What has it meant for you to have this space? We'll talk a little bit about that.
I think, I mean, kind of piggybacking off what I was just saying, like going back to the importance of writing and the connection between our emotions and our headspace, and how writing can really benefit us just by giving time and space to reflect. I've always had students write daily to some extent, and you know, this year again, I was like, I'm not just going to do it because it's another day. It has to have a purpose, and it has. I've definitely gotten away from trying to give some academic purpose behind it for every single day. Sometimes it's just what I think we want to write about that day. And I think, or I hope, I guess, going forward that this can kind of be a mainstay for my teaching practice, and that we will continue to honor what our students really need. I mean, there's so much, like that SEL, social emotional learning phrase, gets thrown around so much. And even, I mean, there's a lot to go into that, but like, I think it's just a Band-Aid, and we mention it because we feel like we have to mention it. And I feel lucky as an English teacher that it is something, I mean, I don't know, there's a podcast I listen to with an or I guess not an ex-addict, he's recovered addict, and he talks about how journaling has always been part of his recovery, and like maintaining that an honest space, and a space that allows you to mess up and be reflective and to think through things and work things out. And I do think it's like a human part of us to want to catalog our thoughts and to have a space to do that. And so I think it's fortunate that I get to do that with students as part of my curriculum, even if it's just a way to keep them, give them a space for that. But also this year, for the students who I don't get to see and talk to regularly, it's the only I have on them. And so that's both heartbreaking at some points, because I write them back. I don't know if they even actually see my messages, because we're using a new platform that no one has used before. When I can, I try to send them a message through Teams or something to just acknowledge that I read their work, and that also, like, have you looked at this, or do you know this thing? So that has helped me feel more connected to them. I don't know how much they feel it on the other side of the screen, but yeah, I mean, I think, again, I kind of feel like I'm in that same headspace that I am at the end of the summer, when I feel like, okay, yeah, I'm going to hold on to this really student-centered education. And it does feel much more possible right now, especially with technology. I mean, it's still not equitable. I know I have students, I think at this point, we now have a laptop in every student's hand, not just every household. So that's good. It took, I don't know, 7 months to happen. But, last year we read The Great Gatsby because it was the only book that I had enough copies for my students that was a tolerable book to teach. And this year we've got, we're reading Salvage the Bones because there's a PDF online, and we're reading Stamped because I can just take a picture of the pages with my phone and make a PDF and send it to them, and they can all read it because they all have devices. And that's really amazing that, like, within this very constrained world, we do have these kind of new opportunities to give our students. And I know it's a very much a double-edged sword. The first years I taught were at a school that went one-to-one the first week I got there, and I was not prepared, and the students were not prepared. And it was kind of a cluster, because we were, they were figuring out ways to use those devices for everything but school. And we were being told that they had to use the devices all day long, and people weren't bringing their charging cords. And it was just a mess all the time. But now it feels like there's this sense of, like, I don't know, the new frontier with it. And I know they're using it for things they shouldn't be, but at least in my room, I think we're using it for good.
So that's a lot about the direction that I think education needs to go in, and that's something that we've talked a lot about. So do you feel like there's any specific issues that you think our teachers are facing now, and something that should be addressed?
I feel like I see a teacher burnout article posted every other day or come up on the New York Times. That is one thing that I worry about. And, there's a lot of things that I worry about with our students. And I know I'm reluctant to even touch on the loss of education right now. I feel like that's not, for me personally, the right thing to focus on when we are in the middle. We have kids. My colleague the other day said one of his kids and her mother were both hospitalized in the last month from the virus. And to worry about and she's a senior too, but to worry about her not learning her math functions or something for a year just seems like the wrong priority right now. And so that, I do wish there was more concentration on a larger scale. It seems like teachers are having to pick up, again, as usual, kind of the pick up all the pieces of what our students really need and what their families really need right now. And it's not about tests or getting the standards right or whatever it is. I think to me, as long as we've got them engaged in something right now, like at least for a few hours a day, so that when they go home and they're on their phone, they're, I don't know, in whatever world they're in, but to just give them some space and to remind them that there are some adults that are still here for them. I think that's really important. And I would love to see that become more of a priority at a higher level. We're just reading in Stamped the chapter about No Child Left Behind. And I was kind of explaining to my students, like, this decision is the reason you take 6 tests a year. And the reason why our district is considered a failing district, and, among other things. But that in hindsight, we can see was not helpful, was not productive, did not save our schools by any means or our students. And I just wonder what a national effort, and, with the president-elect, whose wife is an educator, I have high hopes for what we might see going forward as what our schools need to start focusing on. I think the food aspect is such an interesting piece too. Like our I think it's at a local level with Arkansas, but they were like, Dr. Fauci was saying it, so for the CDC guidelines are now like schools will be the last thing to close and the first thing to open back up. And there's all this about students in low socioeconomic places who are suffering the most, which I completely understand why. And then at the same time, it's like, but are these families not also at the highest risk for when someone does contract the virus? And what kind of stress are we adding to what is already a stressful life? And there's just all this information out there that seems so contradictory. As someone who's in a building with those students, with those families, and I feel like I'm all over the place right now, but it's kind of like all these things are so interconnected. And if we are going to be social workers and counselors and, food providers and educators and nurses and all of the things they're asking us to do, it'd be nice to see more than just like, oh, we're getting a social worker for the building, like one for the entire building. And then what about the teachers who are at a point where I know for me, I feel very fortunate being pregnant right now. Like my body seems to hormonally just not be stressing out as much as I normally would. I don't know what I would be doing if that was not the case. And I, at this point too, have said, I'm getting to work at 8:30. I'm leaving at 3:50, and I'm not touching work when I'm at home. I can't keep showing up for the kids if I'm not taking care of myself. And that's how I'm doing it. And, I go to my therapist and we talk about it, but there are so many teachers who I know aren't doing that for one reason or another and are not having an easy time. And when there's no other option for us, I recently participated in a union action here that potentially could have ended in termination for all of us. And when we had our hearings recently and were asked about that, like why we returned to work, every single person was like, I don't believe what the district is doing is right, but I also need to feed my family, and I need, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, we're at the bottom of the pyramid trying to figure it out. And if we're there and our students are somewhere there too, we're all just, I don't know, we need more. There needs to be a shift in how schools approach all of the needs of teachers, of students, of families. And I know there's a lot of good that does come out of public schools, right. But this, I think, has been a moment of the mirror has been held up in a way like it hasn't been in recent times anyway. So I hope it gets better.
Yeah, me too. So I want to be respectful of your time. We're actually coming to the end. We've been talking for about an hour. So would you like to end with a poem that maybe is special to you or meaningful to you that you feel like would be a good ending?
Sure. Yeah, this is actually the first one I wrote in April, which surprises me going back because like I said, I did not think of myself as someone who writes poetry and didn't initially intend to share it. And I'm also surprised by how optimistic it is for that time. But this was the Credo poem.
Okay.
And my title is Outcome. I have a deep-rooted sense that things will work out. Of course they do. Work out. The universe grows itself. The universe makes space for life. The universe designs organisms for growth. Like all living things, we are microscopic prototypes of a benevolent universe. I exist, therefore I am good.
Beautiful.
Thank you. So I think, that word perspective has been one that's bounced around in my head a lot these last, 9 months now. And so just remembering that, school, work are all such small pieces, and to focus on what's really important has been helpful.
Definitely. Wow. Well, Laura, thank you so much for your time and your words of wisdom, your encouragement, and your beautiful poetry.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you.